Hello and welcome to this special Women's Day series of interviews. My name is Devi Nanda and I run a company called First Edition Art. I'm delighted to be interviewing Priya Purushothaman, a wonderful Hindustani vocalist.
Thank you for having me.
So Priya, this is going to be an interview which talks about your music as well as your other accomplishments and your other interests. It's going to be a slightly wider than usual conversation. So I'd like to begin by introducing Priya's training in music thus far. Since 2003, Priya has trained with the Hindustani vocalist and guru Aditi Kaikini Upadhyay. And also for the last 4 years, she has trained with the Agra Gharana guru, Shri Pandit Sudhindra Bhaumik ji. She has also received special guidance from the great Agra Gharana stalwart Dinkar Kaikini ji in Mumbai and Srimati Shashikala Kaikini ji. During her childhood in the US, Priya had her training in Carnatic music as well as the Western classical violin, right? For 13 years.
Yes.
That's a lot. So I'd like to begin, Priya, with a question I'm sure you've been asked several times about how you made this very brave and very unusual decision to leave one form of music and to come from Carnatic to Hindustani, and also to leave your home and family in the US as a young student and choose to live and work and train in Bangalore. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So I think this path kind of happened, this change happened quite organically and rather unexpectedly. As you mentioned, I grew up learning Carnatic music and it was really part of the culture in my house. We're a South Indian family. One summer when I was visiting India, visiting Bangalore specifically, I met my guru Aditi ji, and during that time I took lessons with her just as like an exploration. I wanted to get deeper into this style. I had been listening to it as I grew up, but I was really ignorant about it. I didn't know almost anything. And I would say that summer was quite critical because in that short time I got a whole kind of window open to a new art form. And in particular, I think her style of teaching and her approach to the way she and her father and family have looked at music became very, it really engrossed me. I was very, very kind of totally immersed in that. And so at the end of that summer, the seed had been planted, and I was in my third year of my undergraduate studies, and I'd already thought that maybe I can come back, I'll finish my degree and come back just for 1 year and just a gap year and do this, because when will I get that chance? So it started off like that. And stylistically, I was very drawn to a lot of things in Hindustani music personally that it seemed to kind of just resonate with me in terms of the space, the style afforded, temporally, of course, that sense of time that was the elasticity of that from Vilambit till Drut, the way the rag is so kind of excavated in that very gradual manner. And the freedom I felt, of course, Carnatic music also has a strong improvised component. But in Hindustani, I'd say it's almost entirely improvised, 95%. So I found a lot of freedom in this approach, a more musical freedom and expression. So that's why I came back for that so-called 1 year, and now it's 18 years later.
So, Priya, what specifically about the Agra Gharana in Hindustani music appealed to you? Very briefly, if you could describe that.
So the truth is, I found my guru because through my uncle who lives in Bangalore, and I was at that time I didn't even know she belonged to the Agra Gharana, so it wasn't I didn't seek this Gharana in that way that so many people do. But in retrospect, I think it was probably the best match for me, because especially having come from Carnatic music, and of course the Agra's rhythmic engagement, use of many different ways of improvising that some other gharanas may not use, like sargam, and I mean, of course, many use bol banao and upaj, but it actually I could draw upon a lot of my foundations in Carnatic. So I grew to love the Agra Gharana in the process of my talim. So it was a kind of, it kind of revealed itself to me.
Right. And having lived and trained here in India for the last 18 years, what would you say are the differences in the ecosystem for classical music abroad with the diaspora and here? Do you feel that you are now in the heart of it?
I do, yes. I think so. Before I decided to do that gap year, the thought came, of course, I could just stay in the US. My plan was to, get a job and maybe find a teacher there and do the usual kind of learning. But I mean, I think it's different. It depends, of course, on the intensity of the training. But being in the country in which the art form is indigenous, I think it's a different level of experience for any musical form. So that was important. And of course, growing up, I learned, like many youngsters in the US or abroad, I had class once a week, Carnatic music, and that's a great way to just start. But in Talim, of course, it was every day, morning, night. I mean, I was living with my guru, so I don't think that experience would have been possible in the US, though there are a few gurus there who are doing that now. It's very rare. So I think there's definitely something different and important about being here.
Right. You tell us a little bit about your education in the US. You did go back and work for a year, I think, at the Kennedy Arts Center, if I'm not mistaken.
At Carnegie Hall, yes.
So, at the Carnegie Hall, sorry.
Yeah. So
what was that like?
Yeah, it was wonderful. So I would say that was a kind of, I had been in India for a few years, and I got a little bit of cold feet about, do I really want to do this? Do I want to stay here? So I went back, and I was lucky to find this job. I still wanted to be related in the arts world, and it was working in an education program at Carnegie Hall that organizes workshops with master artists, basically master classes, but extended workshops for young artists, but very serious young artists, with master artists like Yo-Yo Ma and many other really legendary figures. So it was wonderful because I was still in that energy of music, but I was on the completely other side of it, the organizational side. And it was great to also see how how it works, all the angles, the fundraising, the promotion, the creative, the programming, everything. But I think the more and more I was around young musicians, I felt that I wanted to be on the other side. And so I needed to kind of go through that experience to come back to the music with more kind of conviction. But it was very, very informative experience for me.
Right. Most musicians, whether young or old, actually don't have much of an idea of what the other side involves, the putting together a concert, the organizational challenges, the fundraising, all of that. So your experience, does that give you a window into how does that sort of contribute to the way you look at the ecosystem now?
Yeah, it's interesting because Carnegie Hall is such a huge institution. So many things are set in place, great infrastructure, funding is, of course, there's the whole department that be raising their funds. And in India, and of course we have big institutions in India, but many of the Hindustani sabhas or people presenting concerts don't have this kind of literally 50 people to raise funds, 50 people to market, and so it shows that this is at that scale, that kind of effort is required and would be great to have in many many more institutions. But but the reality is we are trying to do it. I mean, many people are doing it at smaller scales, and then it's one person does like 20 roles in that process. So it's very challenging.
Right. So as a younger musician, when you look at the ecosystem in India for Hindustani and also for Carnatic music, what is it that you would like to see happen more? What are the changes you'd like from your perspective? What do you discuss with your other musician colleagues that, what's missing, what would be nice to have, what would be a direction to work towards?
Yeah, I think there are many things that we would like to see. I mean, I don't want to speak on behalf of my peers, but that has come up in conversation definitely. And one is just, I guess, more variety of opportunities at different tiers of musical experience. So we generally see, of course, the most established artists performing the circuits, and then we see the very young artist festivals, and in between it's like pretty much quite a big gap, and the money seems to also be pretty much scattered in these two directions. So it would really be great to see to spread out more. I would say also it needs a multi-pronged approach. So it's not just corporates. I mean, I would love to see more grant-giving organizations supporting individual artists for projects or residencies. It's very hard as a Hindustani musician to access those kind of opportunities in India or even outside. We see a lot more for contemporary music or contemporary approaches, but for traditional arts, these are also really important. Everything isn't just about the stage and the concert. So grants, residencies. I think, of course, government-sponsored. I mean, if government-supported more arts initiatives, we could have at least more to work with. It feels like right now most musicians are teachers, and then when they get concerts, we just kind of dive into that, whatever pay or whatever the circumstances may be. Not much agency in choosing any of these things.
Right. So, and coming back to the age-old question of, hierarchy and respect and devotion to the guru and the gharana. I imagine that as younger musicians, it is sometimes difficult to abide by all the expectations, especially because you also live in the modern world. And, there must be times when these two sets of ideologies kind of conflict. So what is it? Do you think that there is now a growing awareness in the ecosystem for a need to change, not change in a whimsical or haphazard way, but taking the best that the modern world can offer and progressive thinking, also of course keeping the best that the tradition offers. So it's a difficult mix to get right. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, it is a difficult mix. I do think the conversation is shifting. I mean, the conversation is happening. It hadn't happened for a very long time. So finally, that it's great that people are questioning or critiquing or even just posing the question: how can we reform this? I feel, like you said, I mean, I'm more interested in reforming from within than abandoning this whole idea. I think there are wonderful things about Guru Shishya system, for instance, and there is something about the music itself that is different from other musical forms that demands, I think, a very long period and close period of association of training. I think the music demands it. It's very rigorous. But definitely, I'm all for. I feel we should retain these ideas of respect and honor the art, but I also feel that when we get into areas of fearfulness or servility, and these are the areas that are becoming very problematic, definitely. And so it seems to, I feel it has to happen at the very, at the micro level. And I think the fact that the conversation is happening is in, contemporary scenario, gurus and students are both aware of this. And I feel, it has to happen within each relationship. So it's very delicate, but I think more gurus are realizing that this is, there's a need to evolve. We can't, I don't think you can stay the same for centuries like that and expect it to work. So.
Right. I also know that you have a bent for scholarship and you're interested in research of the art form that you learn and practice. How does that work, and how does that feed back into your art practice? And can you tell me about that?
I think it's a great question that I'm kind of wrestling with, about whether research and can really inform practice research and research efforts. I have enjoyed this process. Recently, I was part of a residency in which I wrote a paper on the compositional aesthetics of Pandit S. N. Ratanjankar. And the process, and I have done some other writing, but this was a bit more very focused in the more academic structure. So as in the approach to writing the paper had that. So the process was I felt it was important because it forced me to really do a proper literature survey of what many academics and scholars who are not practitioners, but still have a lot of very interesting inputs on the art form, and so many intersections of the art form with history or sociology, gender, so many perspectives from which to look at this. So it is very eye-opening, I think. However, I haven't come to my conclusion on it. When I sit down in my riyaz, if all of that information is informing my aesthetic choices, I can't say for sure. It's something I'm constantly questioning, if this part of the practice requires a completely different side of the brain than that effort. But both, I think, are very important for the art to kind of to retain its robustness and sustain. So, and I really admire the few practitioners who are scholars, but there are very few. So I think it is quite a tough thing to balance.
Yeah. Tell us about the book you wrote on your Guruji also. How did that come about, and what is that book about?
Sure. So when I was in Talim with Pandit Dinkar Kaikani ji, many times I would be spending kind of extended periods of time with him in his home in Mumbai, and he was already in his I would say late 70s, early 80s. So though I had lessons, many of our interactions were also more conceptual, and a lot of sharing of his thoughts on music, his philosophy on creativity and improvisation, and his journey. So being part of that, it became clear that I should just kind of note this down. I mean, other people have also written, but I felt there's just so much information coming to me. So I would just record. And then at one point, I really prepared a lot of very focused questions that were to kind of structure our conversations. And after that, I just sat with this and tried to see how I could share this information. I didn't want it to be strictly like a biography. It doesn't cover many like milestones in his life. It's more about his thoughts about specifically on pedagogy, on specific systems to cultivate a mind that can improvise, usage of the voice, and all these things that I felt could be useful regardless of gharana or guru. It's very independent of that. So I basically kind of put all this information together and compiled the book.
What's the book called?
It's called Living Music Conversations with Pandit Dinkar Kaikini. Yeah.
And the other thing that most people assume, people from outside the immediate classical ecosystem, is that classical musicians only have time for classical music. Is that true? And at one level, one understands why it is so, because it is so demanding and rigorous. But I'm sure, and I've talked to you many times, you have many other interests, other art forms, and you have an interdisciplinary mind. So can you talk a little about that? What are your interests? How do you follow other art forms? And how does that feed into your practice?
Sure. I think, yeah, I do think the reason why probably many Indian classical artists get so kind of consumed in this is because it really takes so much effort and time. But I absolutely, I think it's very important to cross-pollinate, to be quite open. Just the mind has to be very open to receive influences from many spheres, just to kind of shape and constantly refine ideas of aesthetics, which is really at the heart of what we're creating. I mean, of course, so many years go into just assimilating the knowledge, and I think that's why there's this period of where you just kind of do it with these blinders on. But then when you're trying to really refine that knowledge into something of your own and create your own idea of aesthetics, then interacting with other art forms becomes, I think, very critical. So whether it's visual art, theater, dance, of course, which is so allied, I think it's not always obvious that, oh, I saw this and now I'm going to plug this into. It works in a very subtle way, but just the observation, the more deepening of observation in any sphere can, I feel, kind of deepen your own practice. So it's really about constantly having that capacity, refining that capacity.
And also your own aesthetic response can take you to places, to diverse art forms, can take you to newer experiences within yourself. And
absolutely,
who knows, it just might, come back to your music in some way.
Exactly.
But it will definitely enrich it, enhance it in some way. Yeah. So I'd like to close, Priya, by asking you, I've noticed that there's a great deal more genuine camaraderie among younger musicians today, and it's wonderful to notice that. What do you think do you think there's any merit in younger artists coming together in some sort of informal collective, looking out for each other, trying to nurture the ecosystem, trying to, let's say, invest in creating the next generation of listeners, nurturing an audience? Do you think these are things that you all talk about? Do you think these are things that you think about? Are we getting the right kind of audience? Are these questions that engage you?
Yeah, I think these are important questions. I'm not, I think they are discussed, but it's been hard to see concrete action so far, especially in the Hindustani music world. I've seen it among young artists in Carnatic circles, and that's very inspiring. For some reason, perhaps, I mean, there's multiple reasons, geography and so many other kind of things that divide us in Hindustani music. We haven't come together yet, or it might be happening in pockets, but a larger movement is yet to kind of surface. But I think it's important, even just at the musical level, that this kind of exchange starts to happen, because we are so loyal to our gharanas and gurus, and many times that prevents just exchange and sharing of thought that for which we shouldn't kind of be holding back. This is happening in pockets. I know even in Mumbai, there's this group called Sangeet Sarita, in which we do this. We actually, all people from all gurus and gharanas discuss and really get into the musical nitty-gritty. So I think this is good, but yes, it can expand beyond just musical exchange to questions about like you said, the ecosystem, or even what vision. There doesn't seem to be a vision that the community has about where we want to go. It's very dispersed. So it would be great to at least have the conversations in some kind of safe spaces where people don't feel that there's a lot of, because of the nature of this industry and the competitiveness that breeds insecurity and fear. It would be great to start to kind of break these walls down and have dialogue, honest dialogues.
Right. What would be your expectations from organizers, from patrons, from corporate sponsors? What is it that young musicians think they ought to be doing that would create a better ecosystem and better future?
I guess I would say variety of opportunity, like I mentioned before. This might be very unrealistic, but I would love to see more totally blind selection of artists for programs, where there's just a recording, no name, no photo, no website. And because, it's not just in Hindustani music, all over the world. Obviously, music happens through people or people who know your guru. It would be lovely to just have absolutely, trying to kind of democratize the process of artist selection would be great. And I'm sure there's a long list, but of course, funds is always a perennial issue, but it would be great to be able to offer kind of really reasonable, and no one's asking for outrageous, but where artists aren't breaking even or co-artists are getting paid paltry fees. It would, these are things that are so common and that are really, I would really like to see that improve.
Right. And lastly, what are you working on at the moment? How has COVID changed your Riyaz, what has it been like, and what are you working on right now?
I think COVID definitely just put a pause on a lot of things that we took for granted. So, but though it kind of, for me personally, it felt a bit off center because of just the uncertainty and of the whole situation. Eventually came back to just that kind of solitude with my practice and my riyaz and my own art, regardless of where it's getting, whether it's being performed or not. That process, it just solidifies the importance of being anchored in that process. So currently I have an upcoming concert in Bangalore for Holi as a part of a festival organized by Ekatvam, an organization here. But in addition to that, I'm also working on a podcast on Hindustani music for children. So that is something that kind of has evolved during the pandemic, and I'm hoping to use this as a way to break a lot of all these kind of issues around who's going to be the future of our art, and really just focus on making this contemporary and fun and really relatable for children. So that's something that I'm in the process of developing.
Lovely. All the best to you, Priya.
Thank you. Thank you so much.